All right, it looks like it's 2 o'clock, so we might as well go ahead and get started, and others can join us as they sign on. But just to respect everybody's time today, we'll go ahead and get started here today. And I want to thank you all very much for joining us today. We're going to talk about partnerships and collaboration between water utilities. And my name is Heather Himmelberger. I'm the director of the Southwest Environmental Finance Center, and we're located at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque. And my background is engineer by training, but I really like operations, management, and finance of water and wastewater utilities. I've been in the business about 35 years and started out doing more of the traditional engineering kind of stuff of design and construction oversight and that sort of thing. But I really liked working with operators, and I spent a fair amount of time in the operations group at an engineering firm I worked with a long time ago, and really liked that aspect of troubleshooting and helping people deliver good water and improve their wastewater treatment. So I've chosen to kind of stay on that side of things now. So for the last 25 years or so, I've been at the university, and our main goal is to help utilities. So I've traveled to all 50 states multiple times each. I've been to all the territories, doing different things with water systems. So I really feel like that's given me a decent perspective. And I've even had the chance to go overseas to look at how water systems are managed in Australia and New Zealand. So I'm really happy to be here today, and I welcome all of you for joining us today, and thank you for being there. So now I'm going to have Hayley introduce herself. We're going to have a little bit of a tag team today where I will be doing some and Hayley will be doing some of the presentations. So Hayley, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Hayley, and I've been with the Southwest Environmental Finance Center now for almost 2.5 years, and I focus primarily on partnership and asset management. But like Heather, I've been traveling for the project we're working on now, the Small Systems project that is bringing you this webinar, and Heather will talk about shortly. But we are so happy that we got to put this on for you. I know it was originally supposed to be an in-person conference, so unfortunately we've all had to adapt to online, but we really appreciate you joining us, and Heather's going to go over some of the CEU information that you'll need for this webinar.
Yes, so here is just a copy of the letter, and then I want to show you the blow up, just to show you that there are CEUs available in contact hours. So 1 contact hour and then 0.1 CEUs. They've been approved, so we just want to make sure that you were aware that if you want CEUs, that is available from the state. So this particular webinar is brought to you by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and the Environmental Finance Center Network. So our center at New Mexico, we're in actually EPA Region 6, that greenish colored region there where Texas is. There are several other EFCs across the country, and we work together on this project. Most of us are university-based, but there are 2 nonprofit organizations that are also part of the network. And we have a project website dedicated to this project, and it's at the web address efcnetwork.org. If you Google EFC Network, it's the first thing that comes up. Or if you remember, it's efcnetwork.org. Either way will get you to this website. And you can check out all kinds of things. Whenever the world goes back to some semblance of normal, whatever that's going to look like, and we're able to go out back out in person, if you look at the workshops and webinars tab, it will have any workshops that are in person. Again, there are none right now. There won't be any for a while, but once that starts back up again, you could check that tab to see where workshops are. And you're welcome to go to any workshop in any state. It's not restricted to, you have to just go to the workshop in your state. There's also webinars, and now there are lots and lots of webinars, way more than we normally had. So it used to be mostly in-person training with a few webinars, and now it's exclusively webinars. So there are a lot of different topics there, and you can see what's coming up. You can also watch recorded webinars. So if there's a topic that was done prior to now and you really wanted to see that topic, you're welcome to get online and listen to a webinar that we did in the past. There's also a resources tab. Everything on the resources tab is free to you to use. So there's quite a bit of resource information available there. And I'll show you in just a moment. Our website has resource information as well. But the EFC Network one has resources from all the different EFCs related to managerial and finance topics. There is a blog. You're welcome to read any of the blog posts. You're also welcome to subscribe to the blog post. They come out, you know, probably once or twice a month. It's not like a lot of blogs are there, but so you're welcome to subscribe to it. You won't get inundated with emails. And then we have a technical assistance request capability. So if you want technical assistance from the EFC network, it is free to you. So if it's a managerial financial topic, you can click on the assistance tab. And when you do that, it will bring up a request form for technical assistance. You can fill that out. And when you fill that out, somebody will contact you and offer you assistance. So if anybody wants assistance, you know, on the topic of partnerships or actually anything else in managerial or financial capacity, go ahead and fill that out and you'll be able to get some free help. And then I just wanted to draw your attention to the Southwest EFC website. We also have resources on our webpage for managerial and financial topics. So you're welcome to peruse our website. There are blogs, there's tools, all kinds of things. There's webinars as well on our website. So that's another resource for you for information. So with that, I wanted to get everybody familiar with the chat box. There should be one chat in the chat box already, and it's a link to an evaluation form that you can click when we get closer to the end of the webinar, and you can fill out a evaluation form for us if you're willing to do so. We would really like the feedback. So the question I have posed now is, how long have you been in the water business? And just to show you what it would look like, I will type how long I have been in the water business. So I've actually been in the water business, oops, I should have said years, 35 years. So if you all could find your chat box, it's usually on the panel, on the control panel. I think it looks like a little bubble, a little thought bubble, and it says chat. I'm trying to remember because mine looks a little bit different. Or you might have to hit the there's three little buttons to the right. That's also a possibility. If you have to click more, the chat feature will show up there. So it looks like we have 4 years and 2 years coming in. Whoops.
And sometimes you have to move your mouse to be able to see that little bar that pops up with the chat function.
And I see a couple people chatted in, but I'm not sure if everybody's been able to find the chat feature yet. And I think you might
have, there's more.
Oh, we have 25 years, good. All right, so that's great. We have some who are newer to the profession and some who are been in the profession a while. So we're gonna have one more chance to try the chat feature. And this is, again, mostly to help us get used to the chat feature because we're gonna try to make use of it as we go along. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how satisfied are you with your job? So if you find, you know, working in the water business, doing whatever you're doing to be really satisfying, I love my job, I love what I do, that would be a 10. If you're on the other end of the spectrum, and you feel completely unsatisfied, I don't want to do anything with water, I don't even know why I'm in this field, that would be a 1. So we have one answer coming in, it's 8. And that's about where I would put myself. I'm probably an 8 or a 9. I really do like my job. It's part of why I stayed in this field for so long, is I really like water. I like to help people. We have a 9, that's great. I tend to find people in the water business in general seem very happy with their profession, which I think is great. And I think it's something that we're really needing to get the word out there, because there are a lot of people that need careers and there's a lot of opportunities in water, but somehow we're not making that connection. So we need to kind of let people know a little bit more that it is a good profession, and people generally are pretty satisfied. We have one that it's a new job, so still filling it out. Um, so hopefully as you go along, and I know it's pretty tough right now with the way it is with COVID, it's not normal working conditions. So hopefully that will improve. And as you go along, you'll really learn to like your job. Okay, so anytime you see the picture of the person, typing, and you see the little orange box, we're going to have an opportunity to use the chat box. So kind of keep your eyes out, and I'll try to point that out. Um, anytime it comes up that we have the chat feature and you can add something. So with that, I'm going to let Hayley pick it up for a little while, starting off with what partnerships are.
Thanks, Heather. Yes, so we're going to start talking about partnership at a broader level before we go into the different types of partnerships and provide you with examples for each of those types. So if we take a step back and really ask ourselves, what is the big picture with partnership? Why would you be interested in partnership? Well, as everyone on this call knows, water systems need a very high level of technical, managerial, and financial capacity to meet all of your obligations. And then on top of that, you also have fairly high expectations that are set by the public. And you always hear from the public when something goes wrong, but you very rarely hear from them if everything's going smoothly and right. And when you're a smaller water system, it's even more challenging to manage all of these responsibilities. And this could be for a number of reasons, maybe lack of funding, lack of staff, or lack of time, etc. It's also challenging to meet regulations when you're a smaller water system, especially when they are constantly changing. So today we're going to talk about partnership and explore how you can hopefully save money, make your job a bit easier and more efficient, and also provide better customer service through partnership. And that could be through sharing the burden, sharing your knowledge, asking for help. We're going to go through all sorts of partnerships to help you fulfill those three capacities. So next. Okay, let's start with capacity development because that's thrown out a lot, and I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. Sometimes it can be a little bit unclear, but capacity development does include technical, managerial, and financial capacities, and we'll go through all three of those. Next. We like to use this little Venn diagram here because you can see that they all overlap in some form or fashion, and partnership can be useful to improve on any of these capacities. But capacity is really the backbone that for any kind of water system, and partnership can play an integral role in bolstering all three of these capacities. And I would also encourage you to reach out to your capacity development office in your state. Every state has some form of this office, and they are a great resource all around, but they also usually have some sort of partnership team that can help you either put you together with other systems that are looking to partner, or maybe help you in other ways with partnerships, because often what's really daunting about partnerships is just getting started. And so that's why we always like to do this training in person, because it forces you to talk to people who are running other systems in your state who you probably would not talk to otherwise. And that's a great way to start with partnership. But since we can't be in person, I would highly recommend you reach out to your capacity development office and see if they can connect you with some other systems that are interested in partnering. So we'll start with technical. With our technical capacity, what I mean here is your infrastructure, your technical knowledge, also the source of your water. So when you're talking about technical capacity, that's referring to your infrastructure if it's inadequate or aging. What about the adequacy of your treatment, storage, and distribution systems? Technical knowledge could be your certified operator. Are you lacking one? Do they have the right level of certification that you're looking for? But also maybe your manager, do they have the right experience for managing a water system or managing and looking into the future, 5 years, 10 years, that financial planning? And then finally, your source. what is the quality of your source and the quantity. Obviously, here in New Mexico, quantity is always something that's discussed, and we're always trying to plan long term for what our water resources will look like in the future, or lack thereof. But that might be different in New York, and you guys might struggle with quality potentially. So when we're talking about technical capacities, when in terms of partnerships, we're looking at infrastructure, the technical knowledge, and your source. So the next one we have is managerial. And managerial is about staffing and understanding finances. Do you have the appropriate staffing for your organization? That could be in the office, or that could be operators on the ground, any kind of staffing. History of water rates. Are they too low? Are they too high? As a manager, you're going to need to be able to plan into the future, and so you need to know if your water rates are adequate enough. Then that brings us into the understanding of financing options, which, as you'll see, financial and managerial overlap a lot. And so that's why in the Venn diagram, you'll see those circles overlapping. But when we talk about financial, it's can be often about long-term planning. So is your revenue sufficient to cover not only your expenses now, but also your expenses into the future? You also need to think about your credit worthiness to get those big loans for any kind of infrastructure updates that you'll need to do in the future. And then again, looking at water rates, are they adequate? And what kind of fiscal management and controls are in place to make sure that your water system is running smoothly? So next slide, we have all three of them here. As I mentioned, you can see the overlapping circles. So this is going to be another type into the chat question. What would you say is your biggest concern with capacity? And you can either type in technical, managerial, or financial, or you could be a bit more specific and you could give us a specific factor. So maybe that's inadequate infrastructure, or maybe it's lacking certified operators, or maybe you're worried about the finances into the future. Any of those, or it could be all three, which is very valid. You could be stressed or worried about all three of them. But it looks like we have a financial.
Yeah, and right now, financial is really looming even larger than normal because we've had situations where, in some cases, people have chosen not to do shutoffs. So they're having customers that they're not going to get shut off, but they're not able to pay right now. We've had people who've lost their jobs due to the pandemic, or they've had hours cut back and they don't have the funding to pay. So there's been declines in revenues in some cases, and then the usage patterns have changed, which can affect, you know, your revenues as well. So I see one that's technical and financial.
Mm-hmm.
So you know, you can have combinations of these, you know, managerial and technical, managerial and financial. I mean, they all kind of tie together, but you know, right now we're seeing an uptick in financial concerns as well. I was on a webinar earlier today, actually, from the Water Environment Federation, and they are trying to pass some bills in Congress. Some of the water groups are really trying hard to get some funding out to water utilities. So we'll all have to stay tuned to see if it actually happens. But they are pushing for some financial relief for water and wastewater utilities who have been particularly hard hit by the pandemic, and trying to get them some financial relief. So maybe something will be coming on the financial side in the future. Okay, so now what we're going to talk about is the fact that when you have these particular capacity concerns, one option is to address them yourselves, but another option is to look for collaboration opportunities between yourself and other utilities. And these types of opportunities can be loose, less formal arrangements, or they can be defined, very formal arrangements. So it's really up to you, you know, what kind of collaboration you think you want, because any kind of collaboration can be helpful. It's just helpful in different ways. So depending on what your needs are, like for example, if your technical need was finding out more information about regulations, you know, a less formal collaboration could be possible. If on the other hand, you have some serious issues with your infrastructure and you need help with having somebody come in and take over your system, and you'd really want to be out of the water business, you might be looking for some more formal arrangement. So we're going to talk about some examples now of different kinds of collaboration that can be done, and you'll see the sort of where on the spectrum it falls from a loose, less formal type of collaboration to a defined, more formal type of collaboration, because there are lots of different types. And we're going to give examples along the way of different kinds of collaboration. So one of the most helpful but very informal collaboration opportunities, just information sharing. So opportunities for systems to get together and share information regarding, regulations, planning, infrastructure, legal concerns, regulatory concerns, whatever. Just a way of formal in the sense of like you meet monthly or you meet weekly or you get on the phone or you do a Zoom call or whatever it is. It's not just, I'm going to pick up the phone and call somebody I know. It's more formal than that, but it's not an arrangement that requires you to give up autonomy or anything else. You're going to keep your utility completely individual, but you're going to have an opportunity to share with other people. So one example is the Northern Mariana Islands. This is one of the US territories out in the Pacific. It's actually closer to Japan than it is to the United States. I have been there several times. It does take a long time to get there. And in the Northern Mariana Islands, the water utility that serves the community on the island is not reliable enough. So the hotels and major businesses have started their own water utilities. So even though they're within connection distance to a water line from the community system, the lack of reliability and the lack of quality, because for a very long time they weren't even able to supply 24/7 water. So the hotels and restaurants and other businesses on the island have their own water utilities. So that meant that there are hundreds of non-community systems on the island, and they really wanted to find out information from each other of how to run the water utilities, and formed a group that meets monthly over lunch, and they would rotate around to the different utilities and share information about regulations and operation and maintenance, or just anything, just to be able to share from one another, because being isolated like that and you're just one little utility, it's hard to find out that information, but this group gave them the opportunity to share. Another example is right here in New Mexico. This is a group we worked with for a long time. When they first started this group was in a county, it's Doña Ana County, so it's down there by the border of New Mexico and Mexico. And there are quite a few small utilities in that county, and they really felt like they needed help just understanding regulations. They were facing some similar pressures and issues. So they got together and they would meet monthly to discuss some legal issues that they were all having, regulatory concerns, all kinds of things. And it really gave them opportunities to morph into all sorts of other things. So some of the other types of collaborations that we talk about later, you'll actually see examples that, or New Mexico has examples where they turned into that. So from this very informal monthly get together where they rotate around the systems, there were some systems that merged. We're going to have that example later. There were systems that signed a mutual aid agreement. They purchased equipment together. There was all kinds of things that sprung out of just the ability to get to know each other and share. So even starting this less formal way can lead to other types of collaboration. So equipment sharing is another possibility, and it's still on the less formal side of the spectrum. And this is a case where systems share equipment, so each one doesn't have to buy, own, or rent all the equipment they need. So it might be, for example, really expensive for you to have equipment to locate pipe. So you decide that you're all going to get together and you're going to buy some equipment that will help you locate pipe, like maybe a ground penetrating radar or something, because they're pretty pricey. And so 10 of you get together and decide that you're all going to buy this equipment together. So that's the type of arrangement where you can or you can decide you want to share a backhoe, something of that nature. So Hayley is going to talk through a couple of examples there.
So we have two examples here. On the left is Montana, and then on the right we have Utah. And in Montana, Great Falls, which is about 59,000 people, and Helena, the capital, which is around 31,000, those are some of the biggest towns in Montana. And so they got together with several smaller systems surrounding these two towns and provided equipment and also personnel to help tap water lines for the nearby small areas, the smaller systems in the areas. And this allowed the larger systems, Great Falls and Helena, to bill for their employee time, the travel, and also the use of that equipment. And then the smaller systems benefited because they got that technical help or the use of equipment that they could not afford. So the larger system is getting the extra revenue, but the smaller system is getting the expertise and the equipment that would just cost too much. So it's a win-win situation. And then in Utah, it was a very similar experience. We had the largest water system in the area was providing assistance to about 30 smaller water systems nearby, and even more assistance. So that included distributing chlorine, lending equipment and parts and supplies. And they even went a step further in this case, and they established an organization to help train water operators so that while the 30 smaller towns nearby didn't necessarily need a full-time water operator, they could share water operators that were trained from this facility that would go to these nearby much smaller systems. And again, the win-win here is Tremonton got the extra revenue from these smaller water systems, while the smaller water systems got the expertise and the training and the equipment that they otherwise would not have access to.
So moving along, we have another one, which is a little bit more formal, is a buying consortium where systems get together and choose to buy things together. So they have a formal plan where one member of the group is going to negotiate for the whole group. And maybe it's to buy chemicals, maybe it's to buy services such as leak detection or tank inspection or something like that. It can be really anything that you want. There are several examples of this. The one we have on the screen is the Southern Maine Regional Water Council, but there are definitely others. And you can kind of read some general information there on the screen. And combined, the 7 utilities that make up the Southern Maine Regional Water Council serve about 300,000 people in 23 communities. So it's a fairly large, endeavor. It's covering quite a bit of territory there. And they have a purchasing group, and it's led by a chairperson appointed by that council board. And then participation in each of the bids is elective, so you don't have to buy through that if you don't want to. And then bulk purchasing of chemicals has resulted in pretty good savings for them. And they've also had savings in tank maintenance. And we ourselves at the EFC are quite aware of this tank maintenance issue. We've done some tank inspections where we've gotten some tribal water utilities together. And by having one company come out and do a whole bunch of tanks at once, we got a really good price as opposed to each one separately. So having a group that can buy things together can give you buying power that one individual system by itself can't negotiate, but several systems together can negotiate. But it's still an informal relationship in the sense that you still have complete autonomy of your water utility, and there isn't anybody who's going to come in and do anything specific at your utility. So you're getting benefits without having to give up any control. So if it's, sometimes people don't want to give up that autonomy, these other less formal relationships can sometimes be really beneficial if that's the case. Another type is a mutual aid or emergency assistance agreement. And this can be done informally in the sense that a group of utilities can get together and sign one of these. So I mentioned the Doñana County example in New Mexico. They eventually did this. So after a couple of years of meeting monthly, they decided to create their own mutual aid agreement between them and it was structured how they wanted it to be structured. So for example, they would have people, if you wanted to share pipe, you would know, they would have an inventory of who has pipe, and then they'd say, okay, I need, 100 feet of 6-inch pipe. Who has that? Okay, this system has it. And you paid them back in the pipe rather than the money. So you could, after the fact, buy the 6-inch pipe and give it back to the utility you borrowed it from, or got it from. So they had their own sort of way of working out mutual aid. There's also a more formal group called the Water Wastewater Agency Response Network, or WARN. There are WARNs all over the country. I think every state but one has a WARN, and the one state was working on setting one up. And it's a mutual aid and assistance network to provide systems with an opportunity to help each other, but being in a more organized fashion. It came out of the Hurricane Katrina and Rita days, where there was a lot of needs in Texas and Louisiana, but it was difficult to figure out how to get people the help that they needed. So this WARN sort of framework was set up so that the utilities could, people who needed help or were able to offer help had more of a structured way to provide that help. It's for any type of water system, regardless of how you're owned. And it's really important to know that nobody is ever obligated to send resources or ask for help. So if you're a member of WARN, it doesn't obligate you. If somebody down the road from you is having problems, you're not obligated to go help them. You're just able to if you want to, but you don't have to. So if you find yourself in a situation where you maybe can't spare a person, or something's going on and you can't help, you don't have to. So it's only there if you need it. You're not obligated to do anything. And you can also be a member of other mutual aids. It doesn't restrict you. So if you're doing this one, you can do other ones as well. And so the more members, the more opportunities there are to help each other. And it's an agreement that's really meant, again, to help clarify things like liability, reimbursements, that sort of thing. So there is a New York WARN, and you can find it at this website, the New York WARN website. And that can be open to you. And somebody posted a question, in your experience, does joining forces through the relationships you described save money and provide better water quality and service? And the answer, I would say, is yes. And you'll see an example at the very end. Hayley will go over an example. Again, it came out of the Doniana group, where they were facing arsenic violations, and they really needed to work together to solve that problem. There's another example that we'll be talking about a little bit later in Texas, where it was a bunch of utilities that got together to solve multiple compliance problems. So I absolutely believe that you can get better service and quality, as well as solving other types of issues like financial. It can help you all the way around. And even just the groups that I mentioned, like the one in Mariana Islands, where those communities, those little water systems didn't even always know what the regulations were. And getting together monthly allowed them to share information about the regulations to, again, improve how they complied with regulations. So I completely support that idea that working together does help in, water quality, regulatory side of things, not just financial. So just a quick question for you to put in the chat box. Do any of you participate in the WARN? Just meaning, are you a member of it? And if so, have you ever used it for an emergency? Have you ever asked for assistance through the WARN? So go ahead and type either yes or no if you are a member of the New York WARN, and if you are, if you've ever used it for an emergency.
And if you're interested in joining and wondering what other systems are part of WARN, on that website, they do list all of the systems that are currently part of the New York WARN. So you can see if there's anybody that you might know or any systems nearby your system.
So we have a couple of no's and we have a yes. But it is something to check out, after the webinar, if you want to just check it out. Again, it doesn't obligate you to anything. So it's just there if you need it. And if you ever feel like you would like to help your neighbors, it helps kind of define that relationship. Okay, so moving on, we'll switch to Hayley. She'll talk about emergency interconnects.
So next we have definitely a much more formal type of partnership and can be more expensive, which is the emergency or non-emergency interconnect. And this is where systems have an actual physical connection that is usually only used during emergency. So usually it would be a pipe, and it could be used if there was, say, a major line break. That's a time that would be an emergency that you would use that interconnect. But with these kinds of partnerships, you need to have very clear rules of what does and does not allow an interconnect to be opened. You also need to be considerate of water chemistry issues between two systems to open a line that is not necessarily opened fairly often. This is actually, interconnects are something that are done now more regularly in California due to the prevalence of earthquakes. In other states like New Mexico, it can be a lot harder because we are so spread out. We're not really close together to have that physical interconnect. But the example we are going to use is actually from a town in South Dakota. So next slide, there we go. So this is South Dakota. We have a small town, Aurora, that has a population that is only 500 with 250 connections, and it is located only 5 miles from a much larger town, Brookings, which has a population of around 22,000 people. And so Aurora was finding that they were consistently violating the MCL, the maximum contaminant level for nitrate. In addition to that, they did not have a plant operator with the adequate certification and also lacked financial resources, which many small systems can struggle with. So all of these problems were stacking up. And Aurora contacted Brookings and asked if they could share the cost of a transmission pipeline to interconnect the two systems to solve these problems. And luckily, Brookings agreed. And so Aurora customers had to pay slightly more for water than they used to, but they're paying much less than if they had to pay for a new nitrate treatment to be installed. So a win-win. Brookings got additional revenue, but Aurora got consistent and safe drinking water. Next. Next, we have operational collaboration, and this can be less formal. We tend to recommend it be more formal, but this is where systems share an operator or contract with the same operator or operation company. Why we say more formal is because if it's a system that you haven't worked with often, you just want to make sure that all of the legal bases are covered. But we have seen several small systems where the towns are right next to each other and maybe the water operators are cousins or something. And so it makes sense for them to have a very informal agreement where if one is out of town, the other can cover that small town for them. But there's also ways to collaborate more formally. So that would be contracting to do water sampling, or for a fee, there are contract water operators that can conduct back T sampling or chlorine residual testing. You could also think about less formal ways of maybe going to the lab with your samples. So in New Mexico, Santa Fe is the capital, but they don't have a lab to run any of their samples through. So they have to drive to Albuquerque, which is an hour one way, so a 2-hour round trip. And that is the case for many small systems as well. They have to take all of their samples to Albuquerque. So if there was some sort of agreement that they could come to that one person would drive samples all the way to Albuquerque, that would save not only time, but also money.
And
So our, oh,
that's an
go ahead.
example that I was just going to mention. That's a process that they used in North Dakota, where they would have what they called, I think they called them honey bucket runs, where they would have one person go around to all the water utilities and collect samples from them, like not take the samples themselves, but just pick up the bottles. And one person would drive them. So maybe once a month they would rotate, or they would do it on a quarterly basis where, okay, for 3 months, I'm going to collect everybody's samples and drive them to the lab. So you'd only have to do your turn maybe once a year, or, you know, once a quarter or something like that. So it is an option again, and that would help with your compliance. if it's hard to get your samples to the lab and you work with others so that only one person has to drive them in instead of everybody.
Mm-hmm. Great point, Heather. And um, that's not our example here, but we've heard from several different systems that they do this in an informal way. And that's why, again, we like to have these trainings in person. So if we can kind of get some networking going, then hopefully you can meet some of your nearby systems to maybe set up something like that. But here, for our example, we have a small town in Iowa, Panora, that was about 45-ish miles from the capital, Des Moines. And it was a pretty small system. It had around 1,100, 1,200 people with 700 connections. And they approached Des Moines and actually signed, they had basically had trouble retaining staff, which is not uncommon. Getting a certified operator to stay in a small town that's maybe not close to other towns or a bigger town can be hard, especially if it's not full-time work. So Panora was having trouble retaining staff, and they approached Des Moines about it, and they signed an MOU with Des Moines, a memorandum of understanding, to allow Des Moines to monitor their treatment plant remotely. And this limited the need for an on-site operator to only about 2.5 hours per day. And again, as you'll see a theme here, the larger utility gets that extra revenue by doing this, and then the smaller utility gets access to operators that they originally had trouble recruiting, or if they were able to recruit, retaining those people. So next will be interlocal agreements. And an interlocal agreement is basically, very broadly, agreement to buy or sell water services to one another. And instead of doing an example for this one, I actually want to point out some resources for you that we have. So next. So here are two resources that our sister center at the University of North Carolina have. Their website is down there, but if you're unable to find the resources, please feel free to email me and I can easily send you a PDF. But we have crafting interlocal water and wastewater agreements, and also consolidation of water and water systems options and considerations. And these two documents go over the importance of removing ambiguity, defining service area boundaries, thresholds, meter maintenance, and ownership responsibilities. So when you're thinking about going into an interlocal agreement, you're going to want to get a lawyer, but this can at least get you started with thinking about what your responsibilities would be and what your obligations would be. And as Heather mentioned at the beginning, part of our small systems program is technical assistance, and UNC is great with technical assistance regarding interlocal agreements. They do have a lawyer on staff who has done several of these. So if you're interested, that I would suggest reaching out for technical assistance, going to our EFCN network website and just requesting interlocal agreement assistance, and they can get you started at least, even though it is a fairly complicated process and does require a more legal avenue. And then we also have, if you're interested, we did a webinar earlier this year specifically on interlocal agreements in relation to partnerships and regionalization. So you see it's on April 16th, and that is accessible and free to anyone if you want more specifics on that. And I thought I'd just also mention our COVID-19 webinars, since we're discussing webinars. We've done 2 thus far this year on April 8th as well as May 21st. Those you can access through our website that you see on the screen as well. And for those of you who are stressing about the finances, as Heather mentioned earlier, some of the information covered on this webinar covers the rates, or what if you're not allowed to shut off any customers right now for not paying their dues. Some of that is covered in these webinars. So I would highly recommend going and checking them out. And I would not be surprised if we do another one down the line once we see more how water systems have been impacted financially and otherwise by COVID-19.
Okay, so now we'll move into some financial collaboration. And this can actually be anywhere on the spectrum. There can be all kinds of different types of just financial collaboration. So one example is a group of utilities in southern New Mexico that all use the same CPA firm. The reason this is less formal is there was no connection between these water utilities whatsoever. They were just connected by using the same CPA firm. But the way this benefited them is the CPA firm, the Certified Public Accounting firm, was able to set up a whole line of business for water utilities. And because they had so many utilities, or about 18 utilities using them, they could give the services very, very cheaply. So if you wanted to hire a CPA to work for you, you'd have to spend a lot of money. But if you want to hire this firm to do it for you, is way, way cheaper. It was only costing them, you know, a few $100s a month, depending on size, up to about $1,200, I think. They did it based on population. And so the firm would pay the bills, like write the checks. They would come to the monthly meetings of the board. They would accept water payments, so that none of the small utilities had to have their own office. All the payments went to the, you know, to a single place. So it was a way of, you know, again, really good potential to get benefits, but not having to work together with other utilities. Then a little bit more formal relationship was a large water utility in New Mexico that provides billing services for a smaller water utility. So they're not connected in any way per se. It's just through this financial arrangement where the small utility doesn't have to write out its own bills, doesn't have to maintain a billing system, which can be kind of difficult for small utilities. So this is a way for them to collaborate. And then we have a much more formal relationship, and this was the Texas example that I was mentioning earlier, FMLH, and that's the first initial of each of the counties that the systems are in. So they actually span a 4-county region in central Texas. And these particular utilities wanted to have a regional supply because they were all facing compliance issues, contamination in their water. And by themselves, none of them would have been able to really afford to get a new source because the new sources were very far away. So they combined together to form a separate water supply corporation that was separate and apart from all of their individual systems. And that water supply corporation had the ability to get loans and grants and go out and seek funding for a new source. So they actually are in the process of, you know, completing that work now of, you know, having a source and bringing clean water. So then once the water gets to the area, it will be distributed amongst the 14 utilities, and then they'll all run their own distribution system, but they're going to get the source together. So it's a much more formal collaboration. We also can have systems sharing a management structure, but they're not interconnected. So there's a couple of examples. One is the Red River Authority of Texas, another one, Florence, Montana. And the idea here is the systems are kept separate, but there's the same group managing multiple systems. So you can do this either by charging the same rate across all the systems or different rates. But if you're sharing the management structure, you can have each utility pay a portion of somebody's salary rather than each system having to pay a whole salary. So if you wanted to have like an executive manager, for example, and maybe you know, a few other staff members who help you manage the utility, each of you individual systems is only paying a very small amount towards the overall structure, but the individual systems can be physically different. They're just managed together. And then we can have regional entities where we set up a regional entity that combines systems or territories together. So a couple of examples we have here, and there would be lots and lots of these across the whole country, but we have one in the Albuquerque-Bernalillo County Water Utility Authority, where it was a regionalization that actually was forced. Initially, a city and a county were forced to work together and have one single authority for the whole thing. But it turned out to be the best thing that happened, and it's been extremely successful, and there's nobody that would now say that it was a bad idea, but at the time it was a legislative forcing And similarly with the CRUA, the Camino Real Rural Utility Authority, it was a regionalization of a city and a county area. But there are lots and lots and lots of examples of like districts and authorities and this type of thing where systems come together and form an entity. And a similar thing would be systems dissolving into a neighboring entity where they're going to lose their independence. Only one utility remains. So this is like the most formal kind because you're not probably going to be the same thing anymore. You're choosing to be something else. I mean, not being forced into it, but you're choosing to go this route. And there's lots of reasons that systems may want to get out of the water business, and this is a way to make that happen.
And sometimes you really don't have a choice because financially it just doesn't make sense to run your own very small system anymore. And that's what happened to a system in North Dakota. It served only about 40 homes and businesses for its 100 residences and residents, and it had to operate its own treatment plant. Well, of course, eventually the treatment plant needed some major capital improvements, and you're just not going to find the finances for that with 100 residents. So they found that it was cheaper and just more practical to connect with a neighboring community and pipe in that treated water instead. And so you completely dissolved that utility.
So we were just going to have you chat in real quick. Have you ever participated in any type of collaboration? So have you ever done like the informal where you get together with your neighbors, or have you ever, contemplated maybe joining up with a neighbor, or do you have an emergency interconnect, or anything like that? Is there any kind of collaboration that you've actually done in the past?
Even if it's just talking to somebody about potentially collaborating.
Oh, yes, with surrounding village. That's great. Fantastic. So we had a yes, and we had a yes with surrounding village, and not of yet, but we have other groups around us. That's great. So it looks like some things have happened. So we want to think about your main motivations for why you might want to collaborate. And there are lots of motivations. I've chosen just some on the screen: cost savings, addressing long-term infrastructure needs, improving your customer service, addressing staffing needs, complying with regulations, accessing professional services. That could be accounting, engineering, anything. Increased access to necessary equipment and supplies, accessing funding like loans and grants. Primarily now they're loans, but occasionally you can come across some grant money, and increased economy of scale. So I just wanted you to think about, with these types of motivations, do any of these motivations sort of resonate with you? What would be your main motivators to want to do collaboration? So you can go ahead and type in the chat box. Cost savings and improved customer service. Those are good choices. And in the interest of time, we'll move on. But if you have other things to chat, please do. So common concerns with partnerships. Lack of knowledge of who the systems are around you can be a problem. Mistrusting other systems. Lack of knowledge about these options that are available. A lot of times people think, partnering is just one thing where you have to merge together and that sort of thing, and it's not. Desire for autonomy. So sometimes people are afraid that partnering gives up autonomy, and it doesn't have to. Or no outside independent force to get the collaboration started. So all of those things can be problematic. And I just wanted to mention one example where partnerships don't always work even when conditions are favorable. So there was one example we have. This is a system in Arkansas. It's a small system that was facing some compliance issues. They were going to have to put in a new well. They were all volunteer. There was no paid staff. It was a very small, like less than 100 customers. And the best option really for them was to join with a neighboring system. There was a very well-run system about a mile away. That system agreed to take over the entire small system as long as they would agree to pay the mile of pipe between the two systems, and at the end allow that other system to connect customers along the mile of pipe. And just because of that one issue where the system said if we pay for the pipe, you know, that other operator is not allowed to connect people in that mile stretch, scuttled the entire deal. It would have been cheaper for them, lots cheaper for them to put in the mile pipe than drill a new well. It would have benefited them in multiple ways. Two board members ended up quitting over it because they felt like connecting up was the best way to go, and they were voted down by the other three. So it doesn't always work out, but there can be lots of good reasons to do something like this. And if you have good reasons and there are opportunities around you, you know, I would strongly suggest going forward. And I think we'll skip ahead to elements of success for the interest of time. So Hayley,
Yeah.
if you want to take it away.
Yeah, and I was thinking I could start sharing my screen now, if that
Oh,
works for you, Heather.
yeah, that would be fine. So I will end and stop my share.
Okay, and let me just get to presenter mode. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yes, so in the interest of time, we'll go to elements of success, and we might go a couple minutes over. Unfortunately, Heather has to leave us at 3, so if you have any questions specifically for her, please feel free to type them in the chat, or I can obviously relay them to her later and answer them the best I can. So, elements of success, now that we have explored various levels of partnerships and given you some examples, we also want to go over some key universal keys to a successful partnership, no matter what kind of partnership you're looking at or what kind of level you're at. These are things that you can do right now to better prepare yourself for a successful partnership. And the first is to have very clear goals for your system. It's really important to have a thorough understanding of what you want to get out of a partnership, and not just you, but your whole system. So I would highly recommend that when you decide that you would like to partnership, you sit down as a system. That could mean managers, operators, bookkeepers, etc., and you go over what your goals are and how partnership can help you reach those goals. And if they're very clear for you, then you're able to very clearly represent and discuss them with other systems that you're interested in partnering with. Partnerships likely won't go smoothly if you don't know what your goals are, because if you figure them out midway through a partnership, that partnership might not be what you're looking for anymore. So this is something that you can do right now before searching out any kind of partnership with other systems. And of course, you have to consider those long-term goals and also short-term goals. You don't want to just look 2 to 5 years into the future. You want to think about what your system might need partnership-wise 10 years into the future, which can sometimes be challenging, especially nowadays when it seems like we can just look or plan just a couple months into the future these days. Okay, next we have our obligations. What are our obligations? Well, what would you like them to be? What will you be required to do in the future? And make sure that you have the resources to meet those obligations. Again, you want to make it very clear for both parties, not just yourself, but also the obligations of the system that you're trying to partner with, excuse me. Okay. Next, we have communication. And as cheesy as that might sound, communication is just key at all levels between all parties and internally. That's why we encourage you to sit down with and talk through your goals so that you guys can all be on the same page, and then constantly communicate with your outside partners. As Heather mentioned, one of the key concerns with partnership is trust. A great way to build trust with other systems is to consistently communicate with them. And if something big changes with your system, make sure that you let your partnering system know as well. Outside facilitation can also be a great resource. We recommend doing that through the state, so through the Capacity Development Office, and that way that's somebody who doesn't have any skin in the game. They can be a referee for both sides to make sure that it's fair. If you feel like negotiations or communication is lacking and not going well, it's great to bring in an outside source. And then we like to say that partnership is a win-win situation, but it doesn't mean that all systems are winning equally. Some might be benefiting more than others, but the goal is that everybody's benefiting. So in some of our examples, we talked about some systems getting extra revenue while other systems are getting that technical expertise or that equipment that they need. You're all benefiting, just not in the same way. And so in the interest of time, I'm going to skip to our case study example, and then we'll be done for the day. But here we have the Lower Rio Grande Public Waterworks Authority is what it ultimately ended up being. But before they came together to be an authority, this were 5 very small systems that started talking in early 2005 down in Doña Ana County, which is in southern New Mexico, and they met regularly to discuss what issues they were having as systems, maybe what other resources those other systems had that might benefit them. And they found that, like many small systems, their operations, maintenance, and capital improvement costs were just unsustainable. And so they decided to partner, and some of the critical drivers for that partnerships were because they were duplicating their efforts. They were also having some issues with regulatory requirements. So as Heather mentioned, 2 of their systems faced national primary drinking water regulation compliance issues because of arsenic. And they also found that they had unsustainable funding and also unsustainable water sources. In New Mexico, we have water rights, and so you're allocated a certain number of acre feet, and that's not necessarily enough for the growing population. So these were the critical drivers that led them to determine they needed to partner. And they took it all the way to wanting to become an authority. And to do that, to function as a legal structure with the ability to facilitate a merger between all of the founding associations, they actually needed to change the state legislature. They needed to revise. And so in 2009, that's only 4 years after they got together informally, they passed House Bill 185, which created the authority, and it gave them legal standing to discuss mergers with any other associations, and it also gave them a federal tax ID number. And by 2010, the authority had applied to the Office of State Engineer to transfer ownership and combine and commingle all 5 founding associations' water rights. And by 2012, they had already grown by adding 3 additional systems. And they've found that it's made such a huge difference. They don't have the turnover in employees that they did before. All of the employees have benefits, which they didn't before. The water operators can finally take vacations, which we know is sometimes a struggle. And they also gave their customers standardized policies and rates, which were lacking before, and safe water, which resolved the arsenic issue. So obviously it took a lot of people to make this happen, and it wasn't a fast process, but I want to remind you that it started with just informal discussions. And then they went to RCAC, which is very similar to us. They are assistance group, and so they helped them develop this merger plan, and then they had state partners help out to establish the legal issues, and also they needed funding. So they got help from the Finance Authority, they got help from the feds with USDA, Rural Development, and HUD funding, as well as some state loans. And here you can just see these are the reasons that they decided to partner. Some had larger cash reserves while some had less. Some had compliance issues while some didn't. Some had additional staff while others didn't. Anyways, the point here is that while one system would be lacking in one area, they could probably provide resources in a different area. And by all coming together, they were able to balance that out and help each other out. And the end result was ultimately serving 16 communities in 3 service areas that cover almost 100 square miles. And now the authority includes 2 wastewater collection systems, 1 wastewater treatment facility, 10 water systems, about 5,000 connections, 500 wastewater connections, and now they employ around 31 people. So again, we wanted to show this example because it shows you that informal collaboration can get you to an end result like this. Maybe you don't want that, that's totally fine, but just looking at the end result can make it seem really daunting. But if you just take it step by step, you will get there eventually. And there's lots of help that you can reach out to along the way. So with that, I want to thank everyone for staying a little bit over. We really appreciate it, and feel free to chat in any questions to me if you have any right now, or if you think of any in the future. I will put my email in the chat here, and feel free to reach out for any of the resources that we mentioned as well. But I want to thank everyone for attending, and I'll stay on just a little bit longer in case there are any questions. Everyone have a great day.
Thank you for presenting, Hayley.
Oh, of course. I'm happy to. And I'm so sorry. I know I just said I would put my email in the chat, but my chat seems to be hiding right now.
Oh, no.
Classic. So thank you for having us. We so appreciate it. Anyways, my email for anyone that's still on is hajic@unm.edu. So please feel free to reach out, or reach out to Sarah if you need to contact me too. And thank you for helping us set all of this up, Sarah.
Oh, sure, no problem. I may ask again for another class.
Well, we're happy to do it. We're happy to do it.
Wonderful.
Okay, I guess we'll
if
pop off.
everybody's finished, then I'll end the webinar.
Yeah, it looks like we're good to go. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, which allows me to put my email in there. So I just got it in there, but I think everyone is off by now.
Yeah, it looks like they're all done except one.
So thank you. And I'm sure we'll talk to you sometime soon.
All right. Thank you too, Hayley. Talk later.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.